We are very, very glad that Bianca Brazil can attend the meeting today. She is the program manager of the Global Partnership for Business and Biodiversity from the CBD Secretary, and she will give us a lot of inspiration, I think, about the global perspective, how we can business stakeholders get ready for the next COP. Thank you, Bianca. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I first of all want to thank the kind invitation from the Biodiversity and Good Company and the BMU team to join you here today and to be able to go over some of the process planning and what is the CBD and how these commitments can actually help us move the agenda of building a better business and a better world for everyone moving forward. So as I mentioned, my name is Bianca Brazil. I am the program manager for business engagement with the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. In that capacity, I coordinate the Global Partnership for Business and Biodiversity. And I am very glad to be able to count with Biodiversity and Good Company for many years now as a partner, as a member of the Global Partnership. So just before detailing the planning process, I think it would be interesting to recap on what is the CBD and how the main process of works in general. So the Convention on Biological Diversity is an international legally binding treaty that currently has 196 signatory parties who are countries. The CBD entered into force in 1992. As a result, you will remember the ECO 92 conference that took place in Rio de Janeiro. So at that time, what we call the Rio conferences were actually created. So UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and UNCCD, the Convention to Combat Deforestation. So as I mentioned, we are commonly referred to as the Rio Conventions. So the CBD is currently developing a new strategic framework that should be adopted at COP15. So how does that work? In COP10 in Nagoya in 2010, the parties came together again, as they do every 2 years, but in that specific opportunity to adopt a framework that would be used in the next 10 years. In 2020, that framework actually would expire, and we would have the adoption of the new strategic plan that would pave the way for the next decade. But with the learnings that we've had from the previous strategic framework, we understood that not only thinking 10 years ahead would be enough, we would also have to build a vision where we want to be at 2050 in order to understand exactly what needed to be done in this decade, but in particular. So all this work is now currently undergoing. We had some difficulties in keeping the timeline that we initially set out to do, as probably everyone in this meeting. And now we are in the final throes. We are in the last 6 months of the discussions and negotiations, and hopefully this will all come together in October. So the post-2020 framework, you wonder, why is it relevant for economic sectors? And I can tell you that it has the potential to bear huge potential impacts to business operations globally. And these impacts, they can range from regulatory requirements, national frameworks, incentives and subsidies, resource mobilization, to name a few. So the development of the post-2020 actually kicked off in early 2019. So immediately after the COP in Egypt that took place in 2018. And it started with the organization of regional consultation workshops, thematic consultations, online submissions, inputs, etc. And in addition to all that, we also organized the first and the second open-ended working group meetings. These open-ended working group meetings, they're pretty essential because parties actually elected a group of representatives that would actually devote a lot of their time into the actual framework. What is the wording? What is the language? What needs to be inserted? What are the main elements, components that cannot be left out, and things like that. So they are the ultimate body that is actually going to be drafting the actual document so that parties can either adopt it or make a reference to it, or etc. So 2 of these meetings already took place, one in August 2019, the other one in February last year in Rome. And it's important to say that in all these steps, non-state actors were involved to provide inputs, participate actively. And I think the overall objective here is to ensure that there is a comprehensive and inclusive process that provided a wealth of information that can be made available to the parties and co-chairs in the process, but also listening to other voices. So one of the criticism that we had for the previous frameworks was that it wasn't participatory enough, and maybe some of the actors that are not necessarily the actual countries making these decisions would actually have to support implementation. And I think we cannot deny the fact that business sector is one of the main implementators of whichever frameworks we establish. The business sector then, in particular, contributed in all instances that I just mentioned. There was business sector representatives attending all these workshops, thematic workshops, the regional consultation meetings, many submissions online received from business associations worldwide. And they actually made comments, addresses into the meetings of the open and working group, the preparatory meetings. So we are very lucky, and we are very glad to see that there's been a lot of interest and a lot of participation throughout the process. So I just brought here, we keep talking about this post-2020 framework, but what is it actually? So the post-2020 framework, it contains a vision, as I mentioned, how we want to get to 2050 in terms of biodiversity. So the main vision of the framework being discussed right now is that by 2050, biodiversity is valued, conserved, restored, wisely used, maintaining ecosystem services, sustaining a healthy planet, and delivering benefits essential to all people. It cannot be only about biodiversity. We understand that it cannot be only about conserving biodiversity, but how can we lay out the groundwork so biodiversity can be used, but in a sustainable way? And also, how can nature be the supporting body for all the prosperity that we need to take place in the coming decade? So for you to achieve your mission, you need to set out milestones. And our first milestone is 2030. That has to do with a series of implications. The first one being it aligns with the SDGs. So, in many fronts, we'll be working together to make sure that the SDGs are met. And of course, biodiversity and environment bears huge implications for the achievement of the SDGs. So that's how we are all planning to look this in a synergetic way. So by 2030, take urgent action across society to put biodiversity on a path to recovery. The framework actually includes 4 long-term goals, 5 action-oriented targets, and there is a monitoring framework that will provide indicators so we can go back and track and measure that, so parties can actually report on the progress they're doing against those targets and goals that they themselves adopted. Okay, so the role of business in all this. So we know that this is a political process. This is a governmental process that is coming to an agreement between all parties that can be a global scope. But businesses will have a very, very relevant role to play. So business and finance sector, along governments, will be some of the pillars of the implementation, actually. So how can businesses actually do that? How do you see business actually doing that? So recognizing and specifying materiality. So going over its operations, its products, its strategies, and see what are the dependencies, what are the impacts, and very often measuring and reporting on those dependencies and impacts. And why is that? You cannot manage what you cannot measure, right? So if you don't know how much your operations actually impact on nature, how can you build a plan accordingly? So the whole discussion always on value impacts and dependencies on biodiversity and ecosystem services is actually one that's very useful for businesses, because you need first to understand what needs to be done, so then you can draw a plan that's actually targeted, fit for purpose, and that will bring results for your business and in turn also for the planet. So what do you do then with all this information? So now you know and you measured how much is your impact and how you can assess it and how you can move forward on it and act on it. So integrating this information in this decision-making process is very important. So not only do you need to know what are your impacts, what you do to actually address those, but how do you internalize this information into your decision-making process so you don't have to do that over and over again? So if you know you have great dependency and impact in water, then you can draw a plan that is fit for purpose and actually can both save you money, make you operationally sound, but also be good for the planet. So it's an integrated approach, really. Greening supply chains and portfolios. So look into your operations and identify what are the major gaps and major issues you have, and then draw a plan accordingly. Also, I don't think anybody wants businesses to do everything at once. I think this could be a step approach, but it needs to start. We've been talking about this for the last decade, and I think now we have so many tools and so many interesting opportunities with all the digital tools that we have at hand. I think now is a very, very, very positive time for us to start actually doing that. And increasing funding for biodiversity protection and sustainable use. And how can that be done? We're not saying that businesses need to start paying for conservation actions, but if businesses actually draw plans that can be positive for biodiversity, they're immediately doing that. We just need also to have information on how that's going. I don't think I have a business background, and I know that the company I used to work for, they did many things to assess and to measure and monitor these impacts, but that information never trickled up to the government, so the government can actually know what businesses are doing, how much money they're spending on those environmental assessments and environmental plans. So maybe this is also an opportunity for businesses to actually step up and provide this information to local governments so they know exactly what's being done and what needs to be done more. So now we know what needs to be done, but how can businesses engage in this decision-making process at the global level? So providing inputs and contributions in these preparatory meetings has been very, very rich and very important. There are many online consultations going on, not even initiated by the Secretariat. Maybe, the Biodiversity and Good Company normally also assesses some of this information with their member base. There are other organizations that are doing this research. So having that information at hand is also very useful. There are many virtual meetings like this one that we are promoting in order to exchange this kind of information and to actually share tools and identifying solutions, as a group. So maybe this can be also very useful. And I think with the opportunity that the pandemic brought us into being more active in terms of digital and virtual meetings and means in a broader sense, I think this can actually be very useful moving forward. So this exchange of information, this capacity building that can take place virtually, that can be very useful for us to understand what needs to be done, get to know different tools, mechanisms, practices, measurements that are available, and actually implement those. There are plenty of opportunities still laying ahead between now and COP that we'll make sure to share the information with the team here. Joining the discussions is very important, not only now leading up to COP15, but afterwards. COP15, we know it's going to be a major milestone, but it's only the beginning of everything that we need to do in the next decade. So I think the actual work starts in October. We will need to have many exchanges, many opportunities to make this a dialogue, really, with the business community, and we look forward to doing that. By scaling up ambition, so you run your business, you know exactly what needs to be done, but what can you do more? Can you do more? We always can. I think if there's one thing that we know, they are the fathers of ingenuity. There is a problem, they tackle it, they know how to make money out of it, they know how to address it accordingly. And I think this is also a crisis that we will need that ingenuity to be applied. One of the things that we launched, and I think this is something that we'll be talking a lot today, is the action agenda for nature and people that the CBD launched in partnership with the Chinese government and the Egyptian government in 2018. It is a network, a platform to actually harness commitments for biodiversity from non-state actors. So you have all these parties that have been discussing what the global biodiversity framework should be looking at. But how can businesses actually show that they are also being supportive, they are also being ambitious, and they are ready to stand and make commitments for what needs to be done in the next decade. And we thought that this platform could actually be a good idea. So we could have a convergence of businesses that would be interested in doing that. We can help them with visibility into the actions they are doing. This action agenda will be supporting us in the next decade, so we can always go back to it, see who's committed to what, how progress is being tracked and reported, and what needs still to be done. What are gaps? What are the very good examples that we can showcase? And how can those examples actually serve as inspiration to others? So we can, drive a positive change and build a positive competition. Businesses can also help a lot by sharing information about tools and best practices. That is largely done in different settings, but I think we need to amp that up and get businesses to actually talk about what they're doing, the good examples, So we are providing opportunities for that to happen, but I think we need to scale that up, and we plan to do so. And mainstreaming biodiversity into business models and decision-making process at large, that's going to be critical moving forward. So let's deep dive into the action agenda. So the action agenda, I mentioned it was launched, and now we have something around 200 commitments already registered. It is meant to be a platform for non-state actors. And so we really want, local communities, the academic society, community at large. We want local governments, non-national governments, to actually step up also and do things that are positive for nature. And of course, we cannot undermine the role that businesses would have to play in this. Actually, the commitments from businesses are actually the ones that are scalable, that can be measured, can be tracked, can be showcased in a more concrete sense. So in the coming decade, the action agenda will play this role of identifying successful examples that can be showcased moving forward. We can also see how they progress. We can also address if there have been gaps that made it difficult to continue, or if these examples needed to be changed along the way, why. So these can provide such a wealth of information that we're really looking forward to see take up. So in that sense, I actually brought some examples of existing commitments already being that have already been registered with our platform. So I think it's important for you to see commitments. They can be very impactful. So Caring, which probably all of you know, is one of the leading companies in the high-end fashion business. So later last year, they launched a biodiversity strategy, including some really interesting components. So they talk a lot about regenerative agriculture in terms of some of the products that they have to harvest or to buy, and in a sense to build or to create their products. So they created a regenerative fund for nature that they're calling. And the fund will provide grants to projects that help producers in the front line that are actually producing these raw materials such as cotton, leather, wood, wool, and cashmere that are very important for their value chains. And it's an interesting example of commitments that is fully aligned with business purpose, with the business operations itself, and charting a path to change how things are done in a sustainable way. Some key elements in their commitments are extremely welcome and encouraged when building these commitments. So they include their entire value chains, and that's very important. Why? If you're a big company and you're engaged, you probably have your team, you have your sustainability chief person who's very attuned. They have a team to implement all these things, to think about these things, to measure the impacts and all that. However, if you're a smaller or medium-sized company, that's a bit trickier. Sometimes you don't have all these means. So having a bigger company actually provide and share solutions with their value chains, smaller and medium companies, can help us get the scalability that we're looking for. So this is something we really encourage whenever a company is building their business strategies, biodiversity strategies, and so forth. They have clear goals, targets, and baselines, actually. So they are saying where they're at right now and where they want to get in 2030. And that's really, really useful because it will help us go back and track progress and see exactly what steps they took that were actually positive and actually had successful results. And we can share this with everyone. So people actually understand and learn from others' mistakes or others' right approaches. And also the fact that they are using science-based targets methodology to actually measure and track that result, for us is very interesting because this allows for a lot of transparency, and that's what also we're looking for. So if you're a company and you're making your commitments, they don't have to be huge and they don't have to be extremely complex or expensive, but they need to be anchored in science. They need to try to include as many business partners as possible so we can promote a good change, and they need to be transparent so we know exactly where you were at and where you headed. I included here the link to their strategy. So I think the team from Biodiversity in Good Company, I think they will share the presentation with you afterwards. So you can access the strategy yourselves and have a look, and I think it'll be interesting. I also brought another example from Unilever. So Unilever's plan included the establishment of 1 billion euros on climate and nature fund that they created to be used over the next 10 years. And includes projects for landscape restoration, reforestation, and degraded areas, some wildlife protection and water preservation as well. So they have different aspects in their strategy. The fund itself, it's interesting, but I think the interesting thing for us to analyze here is that it is connected to the purpose of the company, to the products that the company develops, but it also looks into what is most needed. So water. Water is something very scarce, very valuable, that we need to be very, very aware of how to avoid impacting it so much, because we all depend on water. So that's an interesting approach too. And they also plan on report on progress periodically. I don't know if it's yearly or bi-year, but nonetheless, that is also something interesting about the commitments that we're mentioning. There is no prescription. We strongly recommend that you report it, but we are not to say that you have to report every year. It could be a biannual reporting, 5-year plan to report, but it has to be transparent throughout. I think that's the main thing we're looking for here. Total, you probably know, is oil and gas company. They pledged, for instance, not to conduct operations in any UNESCO World Heritage sites. These normally are sites with a lot of biodiversity, but also very rich in terms of oil or natural gas. And I think it's a good step and a step in the right direction when these companies actually look into the science, what the science is saying in terms of no-go areas, and trying to avoid developing whole extraction sites into places that cannot be recovered to their pristine states. So I think that that's also something interesting to have a look at. So how is your company more impactful, and how can you actually counterpart that impact with a positive change? They will be also working alongside NGOs and third-party organizations to support the implementation and verification of the plans that they are building. So the whole approach for them is to build biodiversity action plans for each new project. This in turn will be verifiable and verified actually by NGOs and third-party organizations. So that's interesting too, because it gives them a lot of credibility and transparency in the whole process. Total also plans to promote the values of biodiversity through awareness raising campaigns. So we always say, okay, how can I raise awareness if I am a printing company? Well, actually, you can include your employees into the conversation. You can actually tell them why you're choosing different materials that are less harmful for biodiversity, so they know exactly why they're changing the materials they're working for. Why is there an R&D department in your company, and what are you focusing on right now, and why that matters for me? You know, I am an employee, but I drink water too, right? I depend on nature for many things. So I think including your employees is a very smart first step. First, because it's easy enough for you to implement. You don't need big campaigns or anything. You can actually think with your HR or the other departments that support you in that sense in the company, and actually develop some strategies of how you can actually sensitize your employees for the need to conserve nature. And so I thought it was an interesting example. We have also examples of collective efforts. So the Brazilian Initiative for Business and Biodiversity, which is also a member of the Global Partnership, alongside the Biodiversity Company, launched a collective commitment for biodiversity. The document includes 9 commitments that are common to all the signatories. And all these companies actually pledged to achieve at least 5, I think, if I'm not mistaken, of these goals. So they have to develop work plans on the 5 goals that they actually selected out of this list of 9 here, and they will be reporting on those every year. And then the initiative itself will collect all this information, and it's going to launch a comprehensive report on all of the 9, indicating what each company has done to achieve that, what is the progress in each one of those 9 items, and so forth. So I thought this was interesting also to see how a group of companies can actually work together in sync towards common commitments. And the last example, because I've already spoken too much and I apologize for that, is the Act for Nature. So that's an example actually nested in Europe. It started off in France, but I think that the French initiative actually identified that there is a lot of potential for it to become international. So now they're working with those French companies, but also with global companies or the French companies that have global operations towards a collective effort of a global scale. So they actually already harvested over 150 commitments that are smart. So you know, they are time bound, they are reported on a frequently basis, they have scientific indicators identified for the plans and everything. So they also have 10 commitments. So whoever is a signatory, and I think they have something around 75 signatories, if I'm not mistaken, so far. So they have 10 common commitments, but every company that actually signed with them has to develop a specific strategic plan and put in place for biodiversity. So not only joining the joint, but also developing their own. So in that sense, I think it was also a very smart way to actually stimulate companies to actually be part of a group, but also develop something that is owned by them. So I think in that sense, I am closing my keynote. I hope I was able to share with you, you know, the clear objectives that these commitments have. But most of all, I think this can give you an idea of what we mean when we say build commitments. The commitment is for a major global common higher objective, that is to safeguard the planet, to have a better life for everyone, to still be a feasible, profitable business, but also thinking, moving forward, how you can transform what you do to actually achieve something better. So thank you everyone for joining us, for your interest. We have a long way to go. Business can be leaders of the change, and we are here to support you in that choice and in that journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bianca. That was really informative, exhaustive, and inspiring, I think. And as you said, business can really play a major role, and we really hope to get more front runners and more companies involved within the process. So I was having a look at the chat. I don't see any questions now. If you have questions, you can write it in the chat and I will distribute it to Bianca right now. Or if you don't have any specific questions for her keynote speech, we can have a general discussion after the presentation. We're running a bit late in time, so I just say thank you for Bianca. How are you connected with Business for Nature? This is one question that just came in.
Business for Nature, we are actually in constant contact with Business for Nature. We are very much aware of them. We invite them to some of the events that we organize. Veronica, you remember we had our last presidential meeting at the end of 2019. We actually invited Business for Nature to present. They had just been launched back then. I think they launched in the middle of the year, and then in November was our first opportunity. We know about their efforts to build and collect some alignment from the business community. This is very much welcome. We help and support their efforts. Whenever they organize events, we also give presentations to help them. There are many of the asks that we are very supportive of. So we facilitate them providing these inputs to the process and so forth. Even though they are an independent organization, we are very much happy to link with them and to collaborate with them very closely.
Yeah, thank you, Bianca. Yes, we are also, as a biodiversity good company, in contact with Business for Nature. So it's a very big network. So it's very good to get in touch and to get inspired from what they do, and also to contribute in the way that we can. I don't see any other questions, so I would thank you again, Bianca.